Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to host today's webinar on Career Workshop on Pupillage and Training Contracts Application. My name is Dara Khurshid, and I am the member of British Nigeria Law Forum's Juniors Lawyer Division. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Let me tell you something about BNLF first. The British Nigeria Law Forum is a vibrant professional organization recognized by legal leading and professional bodies in the UK and Nigeria. It is made up of practicing lawyers and students in the UK and in Nigeria. It provides business, networking, educational opportunities for its members in both the jurisdictions. Established in 2001, the association has a long and successful track record of staging professional and social events designed to develop and support the career of its members. It is also designed to connect its members in the UK with their counterparts in Nigeria and vice versa, and has become a networking forum in which cross-border business opportunities are created. BNLF is a bilateral organization that serves as a vehicle where lawyers and other interested parties from both jurisdictions can communicate with each other to promote legal ideas, as well as foster mutually beneficial relationships. My colleague TJ will be submitting more information about BNLF that will provide you more details about our organizations and how you can join us if you would like to. Moving on to the panel, we have Mr. Christian Weaver, who is a barrister at Garden Court North Chambers. He has a fast-growing multidisciplinary practice encompassing criminal law, inquest and public inquiries, prison law, and immigration and asylum law. And I think you went for a case today for immigration and asylum law. Well done. Yes, thank you. And we have Mr. AFolarin Awosika, and who is an associate in Stephenson, Harwood's International Arbitration and Commercial Litigation Practice Groups. Mr. AFolarin has represented states, state entities, and large multinational companies in international arbitration. I will now request the panelists to say something about themselves, maybe just give a brief insight into why you wanted to become a lawyer or a barrister. Over to you, Christian and AFolarin. Thank you.
Well, Christian, do you want to go for it?
Sure thing. So my name is Christian. And firstly, thank you for all coming today. My name is Christian. I'm a barrister at Garden Court North Chambers, as has been said. And in addition to what's been said by Dara, I run something called The Law in 60 Seconds, which is where I try and explain everyday laws in understandable language so that any member of the public, even if they have no legal knowledge, can hopefully get an insight into the law and what it means for them. But slight bit of context. So Garden Court North is in Manchester. I grew up in Nottingham. So that's, if anyone's got questions about life at law outside of London, I'd be more than happy to answer. But I'll save the rest for later. So thank you.
And I am AFolarin Awosika. As Dara said, I'm an associate in the International Arbitration and Commercial Litigation Groups at Stephenson Harwood. A bit of background, I studied law at Durham University. After finishing uni, I did law school, then went to work for Goldman Sachs for about 7 months on a regulatory project, and then started at Stephenson Harwood at the start of 2018. Between 2018 and 2020, did my 4 seats, did my last seat in our office in Dubai, came back to London earlier last year, and I was 1 year qualified. So if anyone has any questions about Durham or anything to do with my journey or my process, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, guys. That was really nice. But before we get into the evening, I am launching a poll. It has a few questions, just maybe 4. And I will appreciate if you could please just answer that. There are 3 questions, yeah. Just give it 20 more seconds, if that's okay. Okay, I think we've got the answers. I'm going to end the poll. Hi, Aishat. My name is Dara. Sorry, she just asked a question. She didn't get my name. I'll write it down here. Okay, we've got the results. And for today's evening, I have lined up 3 segments. The first segment that we are going to focus on is the pre-application process before we apply for training contracts and pupillage. The second one is the main application, and the third one is the post-application. So I will be asking questions. I understand times have been difficult, and we've been bombarded with all the webinars where we're sitting behind the computer and someone is speaking for an hour. So 2020 was really difficult. This is the first event for 2021 for BNLF. So we will be looking forward more towards the discursive panel instead of just one person speaking. So I will be asking questions to both of you. And if any of the attendees have any questions that have not answered during these 3 segments, please feel free to ask them at the end. You can type it in the chat section or write in the Q&A. So is that okay? Shall I ask the questions, guys?
Go for it. I'm ready.
Cool. So please tell us about the steps you took to prepare yourself when you were making the application. For example, how did you go about choosing the chambers or choosing the firm? How widely did you cast your net? So Christian, do you want to start with it?
Sure. So in terms of applying for pupillage, what worked really well for me was actually the year before I wanted to apply, I print off the application form that Chambers had released. So what that allowed me to do was see the questions they specifically asked, and then I might apply, but I also sometimes thought, well, I might not have all of the experience now, but what can I do so for next year I'm able to really populate every answer or every question box with a strong answer. So that was probably the foundational thing. The approach I would try and have with any application, to be honest. And in terms of choosing the chambers, it was probably a little bit easier for me because I only wanted to do human rights law, which naturally narrowed it down to quite a large extent. So there's only a few chambers in the country that specifically and exclusively do human rights law. But then what I did do is I still cast the net slightly wider. So I applied for chambers that touched on bits of human rights. And why it's beneficial to sometimes cast your net that bit wider is because it does allow you to get interview experience. And as I think so many people will say on this journey, the more interviews you have, the better you become at each interview. So for me, in terms of casting the net, human rights was very much the focus, but that's not to say you shouldn't extend it that bit wider, because every interview and every application helps make the next one that bit stronger.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that that Christian said there. My journey, I guess, was slightly different because I'm on the solicitor side rather than the barrister side. But in terms of preparation, I was lucky enough to attend an event that was put on by an organisation called RARE. Some of you may know it. They do a lot of work with young Black and I think ethnic minority students now, assisting them with the application process and making links between themselves and the big firms in the city. So I attended one of those events just after I finished school and some before university. And that was where I met most of the law firms in the city. I think there were 10 or 11 that attended that event. So it was good for me as a kind of window into the world of commercial law. I wasn't really aware at all of that as a potential career option for me until I went to that event. So those firms are really the kind of base knowledge that I took with me to university, and then used that to apply to those firms when I was there. In terms of narrowing down my options and choosing particular law firms, I always said that I wanted to work somewhere with a strong Africa practice. That was the most important thing for me. It's a big priority in my life, and frankly, career-wise as well, to work wherever I can with Nigerian clients in Nigeria and keep that connection there. So the firms I looked for had a strong Africa practice with a particular focus on Nigeria. Luckily, Stephenson Harwood has one of the best Africa practices in the city, if I can say so myself, and does a lot of work with NMPC, Nigerian government and things like that. So that's really what initially attracted me. it also has a strong reputation in international arbitration and commercial litigation. And I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be a disputes lawyer. So those two things really, I guess, motivated my decision to apply to SH.
Wow, thank you. Okay, so my next question is to Christian. Christian, did you ever attend the Bar Council's Pupillage Fair or the Target Jobs National Pupillage Fair? And if you did you find it useful?
Yes, I did attend it. Funnily enough, the chambers I wanted to apply to, they weren't there. But how it still served me was I was able to get an insight into so many different areas of law. And I think that's particularly helpful when you are quite specific on where you want to go, because when you're asked an interview, why what area, you can not only reel off the benefits that you know personally, but you can also say what you don't like about other areas and why actually you feel the skills you have are more suited towards the specific firm that you're applying to or the chambers you're applying to. So I think when it comes to the law fairs, even if your chambers or your firm isn't there, I'd still suggest going because A, for networking, but B, because you can at least see how other areas of law work, what you like about them, what you don't like about them. And that all makes you a more rounded individual when you are giving your interviews and you are having to answer questions about why you've selected the area that you're interviewing for.
Thank you. My next question is to Awosika. You are a commercial lawyer practicing commercial litigation and international arbitration at a reputable international law firm. To what extent do you find commercial awareness relevant to your work?
Well, yeah, of course, it's very important. I feel like commercial awareness is one of those somewhat elusive buzzwords that I think get thrown around a lot, but nobody can really pin down exactly what it means. Everyone just says you need to have it. Commercial awareness to me is being cognizant of things that are happening around the world and being able to assess how that might impact a law firm's clients and their business. So, for example, things that are relevant at the moment, what's the new Biden administration's approach toward China going to be? How's that going to affect global trade? What's the effect of the new Brexit deal on trading goods between the UK and the EU? The financial services industry and the service sector more generally. It's these kinds of issues that you need to be able to discuss and engage with confidently, and also try and link that back to how it might affect a law firm's clients. And a big piece of that, I guess, is critical thinking and just being original. So a good example of that is when I had my interview at Stephenson Harwood, it was just after the Brexit referendum and everyone was talking about Brexit. It was really quite boring, I think, for the interviewers. I knew that my interviewer, who was a partner who I now work with quite closely, did a lot of work in Iran with sanctions. And so we discussed the JCPOA, which was the Iran nuclear deal. We discussed the lifting of sanctions. We discussed the recent attempted coup in Turkey and the effect that might have on SH's clients, because Turkey is obviously a gateway from Europe to the Middle East. And so those different kinds of issues which are topical and relevant and in the news, being able to grasp that, be able to discuss it with the interviewer and apply that to a firm's clients. I think that's what firms look for when they require commercial awareness, quote unquote, from applicants.
So again, Awosika, my question is to you. How would you advise applicants to prepare for commercial awareness questions in their applications or for interview for that matter?
I think it's important not to, I would never advise getting a subscription to the FT and reading it cover to cover, but it never really worked for me anyway. I think the font is too small and the pages are so big, it's a bit impractical. But I would say, honestly, just read or listen to the news. It sounds really simple. I also find that The Economist is quite a useful publication. Their articles are much easier to read, but just listen to the news, read newspapers as often as you can, be aware of things that are happening domestically and internationally. And as I said, always try to think about how that might affect a law firm's traditional clients, because that's really the thing that is most likely to come up at interview, or even frankly, for you to talk about at the application stage as well.
Cool, so no more big books, okay.
Do whatever works for you, but that's my personal experience.
Okay, thank you. Christian, do you find commercial awareness relevant to your practice or practice at the bar in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think touching on something Affolarin said, actually about reading. So because my focus were human rights chambers, I found that reading publications that were maybe slightly more to the left of centre, just generally speaking, gave me a good insight into how the chambers might be thinking. So The Guardian, for example, which is a more left of centre newspaper, that became one of my go-to reading places. So although I keep up with what was going on in the news generally, The Guardian was helpful because it would sometimes give me that slightly more left-wing slant. And of course, when you're applying for chambers where that's probably their politics, because I think that's something quite important to remember as well. All chambers will have their own sort of politics, but I think that was useful for me in interviews. And I think just generally as well. So a lot of my work is working with people that are the most vulnerable in society, whether that be asylum seekers, those in the criminal justice system. So being aware of the issues that are in society that then might affect them is super important. So whether it's Priti Patel as Home Secretary, the hostile environment, the effect that's having on asylum seekers, because then when you have a client before you who's an asylum seeker, just knowing what's going on in the world gives you a better window into that person's life. And I think you can actually be a better lawyer and a better representative for that person when you can at least appreciate what they're going through every day. So, to the extent that you can learn from reading the news anyway. So I think it's actually quite an essential part of any lawyer's job, really, in order to do the best service for your client. And I think something Affolarin said as well is that often in these interviews, people have heard the same thing over and over again. So if you can come with something that's a bit fresh that they might not have heard before, that's extremely useful. And the only way you'll be able to really do that, or certainly one of the best ways, is if you've done a bit of reading around subjects, stayed alert to what's going on in the news so you know what to pick up from. And I think just to end on that point, often you have to remember that for the people interviewing you, they've had to maybe give up a Saturday when they would much rather be prepping their case for Monday. So they want to enjoy the process, if that makes sense. So if you can come with something that a bit fresher, as Affolarin said, I think that's something that can actually help them remember you, which in turn means that, you know, hopefully you'll get through to that next round.
Perfect, thank you. So we've kind of covered how we should prepare ourselves before we apply. Now moving on to the second segment, my question to both of you is that what approach would you advise attendees to adopt when writing an application? Affolarin, would you like to start first?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important thing is being concise and straight to the point. I always advise people to proofread your application 5 times, sleep, wake up and proofread it another 5 times, because there's nothing worse. There's no bigger turnoff, I think, than spelling mistakes, grammatical errors, things like that. It just looks sloppy and makes it look like you didn't put that much effort into the application. So I think just cutting out, you know, any small preventable errors just by taking the time to, you know, look at it a second time or a third time or a fourth time, I think is invaluable. And then in terms of the actual content, I would say the most important thing particularly for training contract and vacation scheme applications is to do your research. Try and put yourself into the shoes of the person that's reading the application. Try and include some information, as Christian just said, that most other applicants won't. So the person who's reading your application will remember it and you can stand out from the crowd. One thing I think is particularly useful in seeking to do this is to find perhaps an interesting case or an interesting transaction that the firm has done recently. Lawyers love hearing about how great they are and how great their work is. And so if you engage in a bit of flattery, I'm sure it will go a long way. But just explain why, mention one of those cases, one of those deals, transactions, explain why you find it interesting and what experience that you have, which might make you well equipped to work on that kind of case or transaction. I think that's the best way, because generally I think a lot of people will copy and paste answers from one application to another, to the next, and it's quite easy to sift those out and chuck those in the bin. But what will really catch their eye, I think, is bring up a case or a transaction that the firm has worked on recently and really analyze it and explain why you think you'd be good working on that type of work.
Thank you so much. Same goes to you, Christian. What would you want to say to that?
I think, well, actually, the main points Affolarin's touched on are exactly the things I'd say. I think one mentality that's really useful to have, and it sounds quite crude actually, but it's that, take, for example, a pupillage application. The first question typically is, why do you want to be a barrister? And whilst it might sound odd, realistically, no one actually cares why you want to be a barrister. What you more want to do is actually give them a hook to why they should carry on reading your application, almost treat it as a story. So to that question, which is the very first question, your first sentence needs to be something that will draw them in. So it's not, I want to be a barrister because they don't know you, they've got no reason to care about that. The first sentence should be something more like, a story perhaps how you used to be bullied at school and you realize that actually people advocating on behalf of others is the most important thing, something that draws them in maybe on a personal level. I'm trying to think of different examples, but that just being one is something that, you know, makes them think, oh, actually, I want to read this a bit more. Really make them understand you, make them feel like they're reading a bit of the story of you. And I think that's a good way to hook somebody in. So I guess in summary, treat your application as the narrative, as the story as to why they should buy into you. And fundamentally, remember, they're investing often a lot of money into you as well. So particularly depending on the area of law you're doing, it might be a good few thousands of pounds a year that they're giving you. So make them see why you're a worthy investment, both in terms of your skills, but also your character as well. Yeah, that would be my answer to that, I think.
Cool, thank you so much. Now, Christian, most applications have stock questions. So, for example, why do you want to be a barrister? Or why do you believe you will make a good barrister? There are so many stock questions. How do you suggest that the applicants should answer them? It's about copy pasting from one application to the other, or how would you prepare for the stock questions so you know it comes across as different?
Sure. Well, I think actually the best way for something to come across different is when often you're applying to fewer firms and you can really take the time to make sure that every application is unique to that specific chambers. And the reason I feel so passionately about that is because even if you happen to fluke your way through the paper round or the paper sift of a certain chambers, you then have to have the interview. So if in reality you have no interest in that chambers or that firm, you're not going to make it through to the next round. So it's much better to, in my view at least, figure out the chambers you actually want to be at, where you know, okay, if I get through the paper sift, I can then do well in the interview. So I think in terms of answering those stock questions, why do you want to be a barrister? As said earlier, I think the first question, it being a striking first sentence, is imperative. Don't answer the question, if that makes sense. It's you answer how you want to answer and incorporate their question within it. So why do you want to be a barrister? That would be how I suggest you answer that. Other questions include, why do you believe you'll make a good barrister? So for that, you need to figure out the skills necessary to your type of chambers. So in a human rights chambers, for example, skills such as compassion, your ability to empathize might be important. That might not be so important in a completely different area of law. Saying that, for a human rights set, it's absolutely imperative. So they need to be some of the high points in your answer. And then, of course, you need to make sure you recommend, or make sure you incorporate, rather, the essential skills to be a barrister. So that might be good advocacy. And you not only want to say the example, or sorry, you not only want to say the skill, but you also want to give an example if you can. Anyone can say they've got good written advocacy skills, but if you can say that you've written a persuasive article or you've participated in debating competitions, that really makes you stand out. So on the second question, why do you believe you'll make a good barrister? It's about all your points being evidence-based where possible, which a lawyer will always appreciate as well, because so much of law is about evidence. And in terms of, bear with me one moment, I'm looking at the next stock answer. Identify any experiences, skills gained that you believe may help in your career. There you want to kind of dive into your outside knowledge, actually. So for me personally, I had a big interest in politics. And I think for me, being able to bring out my outside interest actually showed why I could make a good barrister as well. So don't feel like you have to restrain yourself. When you're talking about your experiences and skills, be as broad as possible. And I think it's important to remember as well that there's always someone that can do the conventional route better than you can. So whilst you might ordinarily think, oh, I need to show that I've gone to the best college, the best university, got the best grades, there is probably someone out there that's doing that better than you can. So what you can do is really bring out your core skills to demonstrate why, you know, you specifically are worth being at that firm. And in terms of giving reasons for your choice of chambers, which is typically the final stock answer or stock question, I think you often want to have the spirit of, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So for every application, the person reading needs to think, he genuinely might have only applied to our chambers this year because he's gone through law school to be at a chambers just like ours. And that can even mean you're touching on really specific things, such as the locality of the chambers and how, you know, you grew up in that area. Things that really show your chambers is the one I want to be at. So they would be my answers in terms of how you can address the stock questions.
And just to add to that, Christian, I would say a piece of advice I give to applicants and law students in particular is just imagine that the person who's reading your application would have read at least 100 that day and is probably going to read another 100 after yours.
Yeah.
So the focus should be on trying to stand out. And as Christian said, they'll have hundreds of applications from top universities, you know, no spelling errors, you know, clearly well-spoken, fantastic grades, but that doesn't make you stand out from the crowd, quite frankly, unfortunately. It'd be much easier for everyone if it did, but so I think you should have that in your mind. You know, there'll be a lot of other people who have the exact same credentials as you, probably some that have better, you know, academics than you. So how exactly am I going to make myself stand out to someone who has read 100 applications before mine and is going to read another 100 before he or her is done with the day? That's hopefully will help you focus and focus your answers in a way that will make you stand out.
Thank you. That was very intense. And what I got from it, more like it was about researching the firm or chambers you're applying for, telling them about why them, and telling them about why us. Now, I want to ask you guys about your application. So, Awosika, I started with you. If you have to select two things from your application that you think made your application on one of the top piles that you got selected, what were those two top things were? Like, for example, people could write, they climbed Kilimanjaro or ran a business before they entered the profession. So what were the two things in your application that made you stand out and go on top of the pile?
Unfortunately, no climbing of Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm not athletic enough for that, although I'd like to be. Funnily enough, I think because my route's fairly conventional, I went straight from school to uni to law school. There wasn't that much I could do to stand out in terms of, you know, any crazy life stories. But what I did do is research, and it goes back to what I said about making sure that your application is tailored towards the law firm or chambers that you apply to. Of course, you know, interesting stories are a good way to stand out, but if you don't have those, I think the best way, and frankly the most impressive way, and the one that's going to make firms think that you've chosen them in particular, is to do your research about them, come with examples of cases, transactions, deals that they've worked on recently, give them a bit of flattery, make sure that it's clear that you've researched them and not just, you know, going onto their website and clicking the first link and putting in a one-liner about that before going back to your stock answers, right? It's, this is the case they worked on. Let me not just get the information from the website. Let me try and find an article about the case or something. Do a bit more research about it. Tie that into something that's going on in the world and explain why something in your previous experience might make you the best applicant to, or best person to work at a firm that works on cases like that. So I'd say in all of my applications, but in particular with Stephenson Harwood, because as I said, it does a lot of work with in Africa and with Nigeria in particular. I really honed on that, and I made sure that I drilled home the point that, look, this is what I want, and this is the firm that I think is best in the city to accommodate that requirement. So yeah, research, and if you have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, make sure you put it in.
Not everyone's lucky. So how did you answer that question, Christian?
I think in some of the two things that probably stood out. So again, I had a big interest in politics prior to Pupillage. So I was the UK's youth delegate to the Congress of the Council of Europe. So that was a role that meant that I went to Strasbourg a few times a year and we discussed human rights issues. Now, at the time in Europe, there was a lot of unrest in Turkey. And of course, in fact, funnily enough, my client today was actually from Turkey. And the experiences that I learned being the UK's youth delegate to the Congress of the Council of Europe and in the human rights sense meant that I had a good insight into human rights issues happening in Europe, which meant that I had a better insight into clients that I might meet that maybe have come from some of they've had to escape countries because of the human rights issues going on there. So I think that was one thing that I had in my applications. And then the second thing was that I was on the Labour Party's Justice and Home Affairs Policy Commission. So from that, I had a kind of policy level understanding of human rights and justice generally. So they were probably the two things that I had that I think helped make me stand out. And touching on something that AFolarin said, in terms of how well researched his answers were, I think that's so important, and it touches on, in a sense, each answer you provide, in effect, needs to show your lawyer capabilities. So each answer should be well researched. It's almost like you're providing a formal written piece of work showing, as if you would to a client, you know, that you need to be proving that it's well researched, that you've considered all areas, that you've considered what will be of interest to them, and that's how you deliver your very best answer. So I think having that mentality of, I am showing you that I'm already ready to be a lawyer, and in every answer I give you, I'm going to show my lawyer capabilities, is something that is really important to do.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. I am learning so much. So now we move on to the third segment of post-application. Now, after you sent off the applications, was there anything in particular that you did to take your mind off the application process or to distract yourself? Christian, what would you like to say for that?
If I'm honest, it's extremely difficult. Any person applying for pupillage will be able to relate when you get an inbox notification saying that there's a notification waiting for you about a pupillage result, and it literally gives you a mini kind of heart attack. So, and even now, actually, for some reason, my name's still on their mailing list, and I've finished my pupillage, I'm a barrister now, and still I get the notification and my heart flutters because I remember what it used to feel like.
You got PTSD, Christian.
I have, it's true. So I think that in reality, it's very hard to take your mind off it. And it does become, and to an extent, so it should, it does become a mini job that you're kind of always working on. So we spoke a lot about commercial awareness, but it does get to the point where you're watching the news and every single thing you're thinking, well, actually, I could put that in an application. And actually, if you want to get your training contract or your pupillage, that's probably the approach you need to have. All I would say is it's really important not to stagnate. It can be very easy to put life on pause, pending getting a training contract or pending getting a pupillage. And that's probably it's one of the easiest things to do, but also one of the most dangerous, because that's the window of time really when you can be, you know, getting different things done that will make your next application even better. So the moment you pause and just try and apply without having anything new to put on as an experience, I think it can be really dangerous. So in short, it's a struggle. I don't think I ever really got it figured out myself, but actually maybe that's not such a bad thing, because it means that you can always be alert to things you can put in an application.
I really hope it was that easy, Christian. But AFolarin, what would you say to that?
My answer to that question is no, not for me. No way of taking my mind off the applications. The best way to take your mind off an application you've just done is to do another one. I think, frankly. And, the only thing that took my mind off applications was having, you know, the next stages of applications I previously put in. I was fortunate in that it was only one summer for me, so I didn't have that many back and forths. So it was a painful few weeks, but I got through in the end. But you know, as Christian said, I don't think it's a bad thing to always be tuned in and, you know, always be aware that there may be something that you read in the news that might be helpful for your next application. So just staying sharp and making sure that you're always looking around for things that might benefit you in forthcoming applications, I think is important. But no, nothing takes my mind off applications, unfortunately.
So AFolarin, how many applications did you end up making before finally getting the role or getting the training contract?
I ended up doing a lot. I did loads. I mean, obviously I did loads of applications. You don't want to limit yourself, right? I had started doing applications in my first year. So I did a vacation scheme with Hogan Lovells in my first year of uni and Baker McKenzie. So I was used to the whole process from first year, really. So over the course of 3 years, loads. I can give you a number, but probably too many.
Wow.
I don't know, maybe like 20, 30 different firms I applied for. So a lot.
And what about you, Christian?
I think it's similar. It's hard to put a number on it, probably in part because it does become part of your life. So you're just sending them off, and it's not such a significant moment anymore because you're just always sending them off. I would probably estimate about 50, but I've known people that have sent off hundreds, and I've known people that as well have only sent off one, and it's been a brilliant application and they've gotten pupillage. So I think it really does vary, but resign yourself to the fact that I think as a general rule, you will apply and you will be rejected, and that's fine. You just have to keep that process going.
So how do you deal with rejection, Christian?
In terms of dealing with rejection, it gets a lot easier as you get more of it. So at first it was tough, and near the end I was quite used to it, to be honest. But if I'm honest, I think that's an essential skill to be a lawyer. And if you struggle with rejection, as most of us will, but it's something that has to be knocked out of you by the time you start as a lawyer, because there are so many times when you'll be up all night, maybe as a barrister, you're up all night drafting a legal argument for court. You go into court and the judge demolishes it, and you think, but wait. And sometimes you'll actually think, my argument was right, or actually, and the judge was wrong. Perhaps he wasn't. Maybe that says more about me. But at the same time, you get a lot of rejection in this job. And actually, pupillage applications, training contract applications, they're the training ground to get used to that and see how you cope. And funnily enough, the skills you develop in coping, whatever they may be, it might be that you find going to the gym as a release and works really well. If you can find positive ways to cope there, they are the exact positive ways that will carry you through when you're a lawyer. So if anything, just see it as part of your journey and really relish everything you can get out, all the learning you can get out, with that being part of your journey.
Thank you. AFolarin, how would you deal with rejection? How did you deal with rejections when you were applying?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would echo everything that Christian just said. And yeah, I think that the most important thing is not to dwell on it. I know it's difficult, particularly when either you've just started or you've got loads of rejections and you're feeling a bit hopeless. We've all been there before, but I think it's important to recognize that all it takes is one, right? Some people get rejected 100 times and they get one, and it turns out to be the best firm for them. Some people get it on their first go. There's no hard and fast rule, right? There's no perfect way to do it. So just because you've had loads of rejections in the past doesn't necessarily mean you'll never get somewhere, or it's not going to work out. So just keep plugging away. Don't dwell on previous rejections. Something else that Christian said earlier that I agree with is the more of these applications and the more of these interviews that you do, the better you get. So by the time you've seen, law firms, this is particularly for training contract applications, tend to have 2 or 3 questions that are vaguely similar, right? They're fairly standard. Once you've done those, maybe like 50 of them, and you've got, let's say, to the next stage in 5 to 10 of them, you'll be able to pick out which ones of, what made those answers in particular good, and why you might be able to assess why the others were rejected. And little things like that. Just take lessons from each of your rejections, don't dwell on them, and try to apply them and make sure your next application or interview is better. But look, there's always next cycle, there's always another firm that will be a good fit for you, so don't dwell on it.
That was so motivating. I will just eat and cry. So if you deemed it necessary, what did you do in between applications to improve your CV? Christian, I would start from you, please.
Sure. I think it's crucial to keep moving forward. So in terms of what I did, I was in a full-time job actually at the time I was applying for a lot of my applications. I worked for a charity called Inquest that dealt with death in state custody. But I think effectively, if you're getting rejections, that means there's something you should be trying to improve. So whatever situation you find yourself in that moment, your job, your duty is to maximize and utilize everything within your gift so that you're that better person that can be getting these training contracts or these pupillages. So for me, in my full-time job, it was seeing what other opportunities were available in work, additional responsibility that I might be able to take up. It was also thinking outside of the box. So starting to write articles on issues that were close to my heart, but that also might be beneficial in pupillage applications. So in a sense, like I said earlier, that's a really important period of time where effectively, maybe with a renewed focus as well, it's all good trying to work hard when you don't know what you're working towards, but when you're writing pupillage applications, you're probably in the most focused space in terms of knowing what chambers should want, because you've been reading so much of their websites every single day. So it puts you in prime position to really be embarking on activities that can make you that person that can get the pupillage, get the training contract. Yeah.
But you know, the times are difficult. We don't know what will happen, and everything everywhere is closed. How do you think applicants should enhance their CVs in the current day and age?
Sure. So on that, I remember when things were normal, and I used to always say, I never have time. I finish work at 6, and by the time I get home, I've got no time to do anything. The reality is now that there are so many things we can do now that we couldn't do before. So attending free webinars, I could in theory attend 7 free webinars a day right now. And if I was going to my normal 9 to 5, but when I had a normal 9 to 5, I could maybe attend 1 every evening. It would take me a full week to attend 7 if I went to 1 every single week. I can do that in a day now. I think in addition, I mentioned writing articles. I'm sat in front of a laptop all day at home. I could be in bed right now typing on my laptop, hypothetically, but that gives you such an opportunity to actually be producing beneficial things from your laptop, articles, commentary pieces on things that you wouldn't have the time to do if you had a boss peering over you in your 9 to 5. So I think this is really about utilizing the time we're in. There's so much sadness around anyway. So I think where we can squeeze out the benefits, it's really important to.
Thank you. AFolarin, what would you say to that? How did you enhance your CV, and what would you suggest we should do?
Well, I guess it's a 2-part question. I have to attack that in 2 different ways. How did I enhance my CV? First of all, work experience. I looked for every opportunity I could to get work experience as early as possible. I mentioned that I did a vacation scheme at Hogan Lovells and Baker McKenzie my first year. Back then it was a lot less popular, and I think it required a bit more research, and I was lucky that I'd met people through Rare who introduced me to it. But work experience is gold dust, particularly when you apply for the big commercial firms, because they, obviously not everyone is going to be amazing at the job from day one, but they need to know that you, first of all, have some semblance of what they do, and secondly, that you know what kind of day-to-day is required to work on a big international arbitration, or work on a big case, or work on a big transaction. And if you can say, for example, you know, I sat for a week or a few days in the corporate department of a similar sized firm, or the commercial litigation department of a similar sized firm, I think that can make your application stand out really well. In terms of what to do during a pandemic, I think it probably gives people more time to do even more research. I found that I was quite lucky when I was applying. It was just after I finished uni, so I had the whole summer ahead of me, so I didn't really have too much of an issue when it came to research. But I would say use any extra time you now have in the evenings, any time that you otherwise would have spent commuting to or from work, and put in an extra half an hour researching the firms or the chambers that you're applying to. Look up as I said, the big cases or the transactions they'd worked on recently, and try to really tailor your application to make sure that it stands out.
Perfect, thank you so much. So my next question is, if applicants are unsuccessful, how valuable or helpful do you think asking for feedback is? If it is important, then how should the applicants should go for asking for the feedback? What kind of language they should use? Should they be very straightforward in asking for the feedback, or should they be very polite? What would you suggest?
I would say it's important, first of all, always to be polite, always to be gracious. Just because you may be rejected from a law firm or a chambers doesn't mean you can't apply again next year. So you don't want to burn any bridges if you take a rejection particularly badly. But of course, feedback is always useful, and I think that wherever you can, you should request it. I think most firms, I'm not sure what it's like with chambers, but most firms only offer feedback once you get to the application stage once you get to the interview stage and beyond. But yeah, always ask for feedback. I think it's very important. One story I could tell on this point, I remember I'd reached the last stage interview for a law firm that's actually across the road from my law firm at the moment. But I thought it went really well, like incredibly, until it got to the very last question, and they asked me what are the 4 elements of a legally binding contract, and my mind just went completely blank. and I didn't get it. And I assumed that it was because I'd only got 3 of the 4 require elements. And, you know, I thought I might ask for feedback anyway. And it turns out that there were certain ways I was answering questions in the interview that the interviewers didn't like. And it, you know, they gave me advice. Perhaps you could have answered in this way. Perhaps you could have introduced the topic and then given some examples and things like that. So those kinds of things I never ever would have known unless I got feedback from the professionals and from the partners who interviewed me. And I think that made me a better applicant because of it. And I applied the things that I learned from those from that feedback to my next interviews, and I'm sure that it helped me get the job that I've got now. So yeah, certainly always seek feedback when you can, and try to apply it and improve for your next applications and interviews.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Christian. What do you think the chambers would do? How shall we ask for the feedback? What are their take on it?
Sure, certainly politely, as AFolarin said. Funnily enough, and you'd think we planned it, but the story he gave is so similar to the story I had about asking for feedback. So I went to a human rights set, and I think I got through to the second round, and I asked for feedback. And I thought the issue was, they asked about the Me Too movement and what that was all about. This was right in the height of Me Too. And again, a complete brain blank. I knew this stuff, but I felt my answer was not of the level I thought was required to show that I had a good knowledge of what the Me Too movement was about. So I was certain that was it, but I asked for feedback just because people had told me, probably in webinars like this, that I should. And then when the feedback came back, they didn't mention that at all. And what they said I had done is, before answering each question, I'd taken too long thinking. Now, the irony was I was doing that because a previous interviewer had said, spend more time thinking before you answer your question. But actually getting the feedback actually allowed me to hone my approach, so I knew better for next time. But most importantly, it made me also realize that where I thought the error was, wasn't where the error was. And there's actually an arrogance in thinking that you know what the interviewer thought. There's no better way than just asking. And I think in terms of how to go about obtaining the feedback, it is definitely the case that some chambers have a policy of, we only give feedback to final round interviewees. And that makes a lot of sense because often there are a lot of people being interviewed. But I'm always one for breaking convention where necessary. And often what can be really helpful is if at the end of your interview, you're just really appreciative of the time that people have given you. It means that, let's say you don't get it and you need to ask for feedback, but you remember one of the individuals on the panel who you really thanked at the end. And it should be a genuine thank you, of course. But you can use that and you can kind of email the person directly in your polite nature and ask. And actually, because maybe they just saw that you genuinely really cared about the interview and you genuinely actually recognized they were taking time out of their day to give you the time of day to try and sell yourself to that chambers, often they'll break protocol and reply for you. I know I said to me, what if I were ever on an interview panel and someone was just very appreciative of the time I'd given them. So that's certainly something to consider as well.
Wow, thank you so much. So my next question, it's a big one. So if you want me to repeat, just let me know. A recent Bar Council survey found that up to 30% of the chambers are changing their plans by either deferring or cancelling pupillages starting in 2020 because of the pandemic. A number of chambers have also postponed their mini pupillage scheme. What would you suggest potential applications should be doing to overcome these pandemic hurdles? Do you have any views on how should they utilize their time to enhance their skills and what skills they should be focusing on? I know you've answered the question that, they should be enhancing their skills, but what kind of skills should they be focusing on?
Go for AFolarin.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the skills are the same, right? Although we're all locked up indoors and not able to do much, I think in terms of the application, there's not much that will change. What I would say is, on the commercial awareness piece that we were discussing earlier, I think it'll be good and it will demonstrate that you're really tapped in and you're thinking about how things may affect clients of law firms if you try and link the pandemic to some of the analysis you put into your application or at interview. So just a good example of this. I was speaking to a client earlier today, and they ship products from the UK to Kenya. And they were discussing how, first of all, Brexit has created a huge raft of bureaucracy that they now need to deal with, but also the additional costs of fumigation and the different checks to make sure that your goods satisfy a cleanliness requirement once they reach the border, otherwise it'll get turned away. And so things like that, and try to link in, you know, how the pandemic might be affecting traditional firms, traditional clients of the firm or chambers you're applying to, I think would show A, commercial awareness, and B, just a real insight into the research you've done about their clients, and how you might, what kind of skills you would bring to the table if you work there.
Thank you. Christian, what would you say to that?
Yeah, as ever, completely agree with that answer. I think one thing that can be done as well is, I feel like in the pandemic, it's a brilliant time to work on self. So again, if you're with an employer, there's always the part of you that has to be good for them. Whereas in a pandemic, when you're on your own, you can really develop skills that benefit you fundamentally. So I think if, let's say you wanted to get into environmental law and you decided to dedicate your Twitter feed to answering environmental law questions, it's a very random example, but the point being, you can develop yourself as an expert. And in the process of you doing so, you're reading up on the law. And all of those things mean that when you then apply for a chambers or a training contract, you're a more, again, complete version of yourself, or better version of yourself, ready to do that. So I think there are a number of things that can be done, but I think certainly a suggestion is do things that focus on you, because it's very rare that you have this time to just focus on you. Yeah, and just make those things tie into your applications where possible.
That is so true. Thank you. So the last question from me is, what are your top 3 tips for applicants, and do those tips change when the effects of the current pandemic are factored in? So Awosika, do you want to answer that first?
That's a difficult one. 3.
You can give 4, don't mind.
Research, and research.
Okay.
I can't stress it enough. I really do think that it's the most important thing when you're doing applications. It's the thing that makes your application stand out the most, and it shows that you're genuinely interested in where you're applying to, and you're not, you know, the firm or chambers you're applying to isn't one of 100 that you're planning on sending off that day. So research.
Thank you. Christian, over to you.
Sure. My top one would be research. And then I think following that, show you when the firm align. I think it's really good when you can almost switch the balance of power, and it's not a thing of, I want you to realize how good I am, but it's almost, in a sense, you're the valuable product. You're not trying to impress them, but actually they kind of need to be impressed by you. So show you when the firm align in that regard. And then finally, don't be conventional. So it touched on what I said earlier, but you know, someone can always maybe play the route you think you should be playing better. So own your life experiences and put those things into your applications. And even if that's things as simple as going to church every Sunday, and the discipline that has, that could be an example that you put in an application. And I don't think those things will change with the pandemic, actually. I'm sure there are different areas that will be tweaked, but I think the core principles of what makes a good application, I don't think really will change with the pandemic. I think it's the things that AFolarin said, the things that hopefully have come out of these discussions here.
Perfect, thank you. Now I am going to the Q&A section. We don't have much time left, but I will still try to take in a few questions. Someone have asked, what websites would you suggest using to gain in-depth knowledge in a firm's particular clients or transactions?
Well, the best starting point I would say is their website. But as I said, I think while it's not a bad thing, I think it's always useful to try and focus on materials other than their website, right? So you could try and find the case or the transaction or the big corporate deal on their website, and then see if you can find any other articles about it and try and fill in some gaps and try and find something that other applicants who might just look at their website won't pick up on. Because again, that will show that you've taken your time, you've done your research, and you've made your application unique. Another thing is the legal directories, so Legal 500, Chambers and Partners. Those are essentially the rankings, and where you can see key individuals at each firm, and also the areas where each firm specializes in or is most highly ranked. So if you can say, for example, I know that your firm is ranked in tier 1 for international arbitration, it's something that I really want to go into. That shows that you've done your research in terms of their areas of specialty and things they're well known for in the market and the legal industry.
Perfect. Christian, my question to you would be, okay, Joy Isaacs have asked the question, how to do research and ascertain the politics of the chambers without getting the mini pupillage from them?
Okay, that's good that mini pupillage was mentioned actually, because that's often a brilliant way to start. But in the absence of that, Chambers website, but then from there looking at blogs that different members of Chambers have written and the publications they've written for. So let's say you have an immigration specialist that, you go on his Chambers profile, you see the publications he's written, you go on that website, and then you see that the other publications are quite leaning in a certain political direction. Then if you do that with enough members of Chambers, it gives you a sense of the overall culture of the overall politics of that firm or Chambers. So I guess fundamentally remember that Chambers and firms are made up of individuals. So if you can ascertain the politics of the individuals, that will give you somewhat an insight into the politics or the culture of the Chambers on a whole.
Perfect. I'm so sorry, guys, we're running out of time, so I would not be able to take any more questions in. But I hope that Christian and AFolarin have answered all of your questions, almost. And before we end today's session, I would like all of you to join the upcoming event of BNLF. It's on 29 January, this Friday. The name is A Day in the Life of a Lawyer. It is hosted by my colleague Mojisola Olabinjo, and you're going to like it. So please log in. I think it's on the Eventbrite, and TJ have also sent in the details in the chat section. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, AFolarin. Your advice has been amazing. I can personally vouch for that. And
thank you, Dara.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dara. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone, to join us. And if you have any more questions about BNLF, you have the details in the chat section. You can feel free to join us. We are on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, any way you like. Thank you ever so much, guys. Take care.
Thanks all. Take care.